a Dear Media original podcast.
Being blind and using the word blind isn't just kind of a characteristic, but rather it's also an identity. And so, yes, it's recognizing that I don't see, but it's also recognizing that I'm part of a bigger community of people and culture and history that kind of all goes in together.
Conchita Hernández Legorreta's journey to accepting the intersectionality of her identity and her disability started with her parents and their decision to migrate to the U.S. in hopes of giving her a future that would be more full of possibility. But accessing those possibilities was a mystery to them and to Conchita. With the love and support of her family, but not the institutions meant to help her, Conchita is forced to navigate the world on her own and devise workarounds that would allow her to thrive despite the challenges that face her. According to the CDC, 1 in 4, approximately 26% of adults in the United States have some type of disability. And yet, as a society, we're taught to ignore and sometimes shame those who are different from the status quo. In her quest for belonging and a good and joyful life, Conchita will find purpose and give others like her the tools to access spaces of belonging and liberation. She will become a leader who advocates for the full inclusion of people with disabilities in the United States and Latin America. I'm your host, Tracy Ellis Ross, and this is I Am America, where we meet people who are redefining their own identity, the idea of community, and the possibility of our country. These stories are beautiful, heavy, and light, and they allow us to reimagine and reframe what we know about this country. Today's story is produced by showrunner Nicole Hill, and this is Conchita Hernández Legorreta.
Conchita can't help but be a little amused at all the words people come up with to avoid calling her blind.
People feel really awkward. It's like, oh, what word do I use? Because inherently people believe disability is something bad. And so they're like, oh, the word blind may be bad. So they use really interesting vocabulary, such as like, differently abled is one that gets used a lot that nobody likes. But like sight impaired or visually impaired, or I've heard some really interesting ones, like not fully blind, like just people come up with a lot of interesting things. And one of the things I always tell people is most blind people have some amount of vision. It's a spectrum, just like most things are a spectrum.
A person is considered legally blind when their vision is 10% of what a person with 20/20 vision can see. Conchita, like many people, grew up thinking that a blind person just sees darkness, when actually, the overwhelming majority, about 90%, have some amount of vision, Conchita included. She can see silhouettes and some light, and if she holds a paper very close to her face, she can make out the words on it. It's not enough vision to be able to navigate the world on her own, but from the time she was little, she came up with workarounds.
I would never be by myself anywhere. Everywhere I would go, I would always go with somebody. Another thing that I would do is I wouldn't tell everybody I couldn't see, only my closest friends. So I remember having a conversation with one of my friends, and she's like, oh, yeah, and this happened, and this happened. Oh, watch out, there's a branch. Oh, and this happened, and this happened. Oh, there's a step. Oh, and this happened. So it just became kind of part of how people with me would kind of interact that way, and everybody would do that. Like my family would do that, my friends would do that, just kind of constantly telling me, hey, there's something there, because I have no depth perception. So any change in the floor, I can't see. And so part of that was also there were going to be times that they didn't tell me, or that I was for some reason walking by myself. So I learned how to just fall well. And so I would go somewhere and I would trip and I would just learn how to fall, because it was kind of how I dealt with the fact that I couldn't see and that there wasn't somebody to tell me, oh, hey, there's something there.
She grew up in a small rural town in Northern California with 5 brothers and sisters. They helped her out with her homework and modified childhood games so that she could play, and taught her how to tie her shoes and dance salsa. She's a great salsa dancer.
We were always dancing. We would all clean the house and we would have music going. And that's how you got through the chores, by dancing. And so for me, it was like picking and choosing what I wanted to do. It was like oh no, Conchita doesn't have to sweep because she can't see. And oh no, Conchita doesn't have to. So my siblings would rightfully get upset and be like, she's just pretending. Of course she can do that. And my mom was like, oh, of course, my Conchita, you know? And sometimes I laugh at like what I was allowed to do. And I'm like, it doesn't make sense, but okay. Like I was allowed to wash dishes and I was allowed to chop vegetables like with a sharp knife, but I wasn't allowed to cook. So it's, you know, there's no rhyme or reason. But I definitely got away with not having to do a lot of chores that other siblings did. So maybe that's why I learned to dance really well, because I focused on the dancing and not so much on the cleaning.
Her family is originally from a beautiful little town in Mexico. But when first her brother, and then 6 years later Conchita, was born blind, her parents decided to leave behind all of their family and friends and move to the U.S. in hopes of giving their children with disabilities more opportunities in life. Her father trained horses, her mother cleaned homes, neither spoke English. They were undocumented and routinely taken advantage of by their employers. They were either underpaid or not paid at all. But her mother organized a system of mutual aid with other undocumented families. They pooled their resources and shared information, and in this way, they survived. And it was because of her parents' sacrifices and her community support that Conchita is able to remember her childhood as adventurous and mischievous and fun, as long as the subject of blindness didn't come up.
Growing up, I definitely had a negative idea about blindness because I think everyone around me had a negative idea about it. And like, it's very common in Spanish to hear like, ay, pobrecita, like, oh, poor child, you know? And it's a very common, like in front of your face. Like, definitely Mexicans are blunt. They don't hold back. They definitely tell you what they think. And so part of that is those words of like, ay, pobrecita, like, ay, cieguita. And in like, cieguita is taking the word blind and adding diminutive to it. So not only are you blind, but you're a poor, blind little person, right? And so it's just very negative. And all of the media that existed at that time was negative around, you know, disability and blindness in general. And so I saw it as, you know, oh, blind people are clumsy and blind people are this and that. But I also received the message of, you're so lucky you're not totally blind like those blind people. That was really ingrained in me of like, oh, I'm so lucky.
Her mother was very protective of Conchita and afraid of what the future held for an undocumented Mexican girl who couldn't see. She'd sometimes take her to healing services at her church and pray that her vision would be repaired. And Conchita hated this. She didn't want to be pitied or seen as clumsy or in need of healing. She wanted to be one of the lucky ones. And so she was determined not to be blind. Since she had some sight and could get by with help, most people thought of her as someone who just couldn't see very well, and that's how she thought of herself. But when it came to school, this mindset could only take her so far.
The connection that I had with kind of learning about my blindness was in school, being a part of special education and having an IEP plan, which is a plan that students with disabilities have in public schools. And my meetings were really centered around, okay, what can't you see? And, you know, how can we work around that? And so I was like, no. It was just such a negative connotation to the whole thing.
In 1975, the U.S. passed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA for short. This law mandates that schools evaluate students with disabilities at no cost to their families and develop an IEP, or Individualized Education Program, that lays out how that student will receive instruction based on their specific learning style and special needs. The law is designed to give parents and guardians a voice and resources to help as much as possible with their child's education. There's meant to be a team present during these IEP meetings that includes a general education teacher, a special education teacher, someone with training in that student's specific learning needs, sometimes a parent advocate, and when necessary, a translator, to ensure that parents can fully participate in the discussion while their children are able to just be children. Conchita's mother would take off work and make it to these meetings and was eager to learn how she could help her daughter. Instead, starting at the age of 9, the only people present at these meetings were Conchita, her teacher, and her mom.
I was translating for my mom at those meetings. And so I had a lot of just really anxiety around it, I would say. And so one of the conversations I always have with my siblings about this is how, as kids who are put in positions where you have to translate for your parents, you're going to make stuff up and you're going to tell them what you want them to know. And you're going to take away some parts and you're going to change it because as a child, you just don't want to be in trouble. So the teacher would say something like, hey, we really noticed that you're not able to go from one place to the other by yourself. And so in my mind, I'm already defending kind of why this is before I tell my mom. So I might tell my mom something like, oh no, están diciendo que voy con mis amigos a todas partes. They're just talking about how I go with my friends everywhere, which is the accommodation that I self-impose on myself because I couldn't independently navigate from one place to another. So then my mom would answer something like, oh, okay, interesante, or like, that's interesting, right? And I would be like, yeah, she's fine. She says she's fine, that it's not a problem at home. And when my mom would have legit questions about, oh, how is this? And I'd be like, Mom, that's not a smart question. We're just not going to ask that.
Conchita and her mom have never heard of the IDEA Act. They don't know how these meetings are meant to go, and no one tells them. Instead, Conchita decides to handle her education her way, and her teachers let her. She likes puzzles, and so that's how she approaches school. When she pieces together the writing on the board that she can't see, the words in her books that she can just make out, and what her teacher is saying at the front of the class, she's able to figure out what's being taught each day. Her friends and family continue to help her navigate. Some kids think she's stuck up because she doesn't wave back at them when they greet her in the hall, but she'd rather have them think of her as stuck up than blind. Conchita knows that she could do better in school if she could see more, but even still, she does manage to get a pretty decent GPA, and she becomes a student activist, organizing walkouts to protest racism and discrimination against the Mexican community. And in her senior year, she gets her green card and enrolls in college, all with the vision she has. Her mother is so proud of her, and she travels with Conchita to her new college campus to make sure she'll be okay.
My mom and I went to like the disability office, and I went to this gorgeous like mission style college in California. And I was like, well, I can't see steps. So we were going through all of the things I needed as accommodations, and they didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. And their suggestion was like, what if we paint all of the steps on this gorgeous campus like a bright orange? And I was like, yeah, that'll work.
No one thinks to offer her the accommodations they would offer a blind student because she does have some amount of vision. During her senior year of college, Conchita happens to have a professor who is blind, and to her absolute dismay, he thinks she is too. So he invites her to a convention put on by the National Federation for the Blind, where she can meet other people who are like her. And then he gets her a free ticket. So she agrees to go more so out of politeness than anything else, but points out the entire time that she can see. When she gets to the convention, she is shocked to find 3,000 blind people navigating spaces entirely on their own. No one had painted the steps orange for them. They weren't holding on to anyone else. They were not clumsy, and they were not pitiful.
That was my aha moment for me. I was like, I've always been told that I'm so lucky because I'm not totally blind. However, these totally blind poor people are traveling by themselves and cooking and doing all of these things that I'm not doing. And so I think that's when I started to realize this message isn't correct. And I realized I do need to do something about it.
She starts meeting people, and they all seem to be able to see about as much as she can. But they're calling themselves blind. And everyone is using a cane.
I was always told that the totally blind people are the ones that need canes. And so it was never even recommended to me. Like I never thought of using a cane until I went to the convention and I saw other people that were like me that had some amount of vision that were using canes. And that was the first time it ever occurred to me.
She hears people speaking Spanish one day and introduces herself, and then is quickly recruited to help translate sessions for attendees that don't speak English. And in this way, Conchita starts meeting other people of color who also come from close-knit families and communities that didn't understand blindness and were doing the best they could while facing other issues that made the world feel inaccessible to them, like poverty and discrimination and language barriers. When they got together, their conversations would last well into the night.
A lot of times it's at the bar, actually, where we would hang out and just share our experiences. And I think that's when it's the most valuable. And understanding that, we all had the same idea. Whereas, like, where are the people of color that are like us doing these things? Where are the people that come from marginalized communities or that don't have the money or that, whose parents weren't necessarily supportive of, going on and doing these things? So we did start bringing it up and saying, so what about race? What about culture? What about these other things? And the main idea that was brought back to us was we're a blindness organization. We are not a race organization that is going to divide us. It was this idea that no, the hardest thing is being blind. It's not everything else. And I think it's hard for people to understand. Like, I can't divide that. I can't say, like, right now I'm blind and right now I'm Mexican. Like, the two are always together. They're not things that become something different. And I think one of the ways in which, especially white people that have not had any other marginalization, their idea of justice and equality is so, like, we don't want to change any systems. We just want to be included and have it be accessible to us in the way the systems exist. Whereas as people of color that are blind, we want to disrupt those systems. Like, we recognize that those systems aren't working for us, and we don't just want accessibility to the racist systems.
Even though they weren't able to get organizers to engage in these larger conversations around access, meeting people from backgrounds and experiences like hers helped Conchita start to connect with the idea that she could be part of this community, even if she still didn't think of herself as blind. A lot of people she'd met told her that they'd been through something called blindness training, and that was how they learned to navigate and live on their own.
I met this guy called Carlos Servan, and he really motivated me to be like, you should get training. And I was still kind of really resistant, but I had also graduated from college and I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And even if I found a job, I wouldn't know how to do it because I don't have the training in blindness. And so it was just kind of a perfect time to make that decision.
Carlos was connected to the National Federation of the Blind of Nebraska. And they ran a residential rehab facility where, over the course of 9 months, participants learned how to cook and sew and iron and travel and read Braille and live their lives independently as blind people. Carlos and others helped Conchita with a plane ticket and expenses. And not long after the convention, Conchita moved to Nebraska to learn how to live blind. Many of us learned a second language in high school or college, but it didn't stick. I took years and years of Spanish, but I still get nervous whenever I have to speak it. I got books and tried to brush up on what I've learned, but it's hard to do it on your own. But now, thanks to Babbel, I have a way to improve my language skills that's been proven effective, and it's enjoyable, and it's easy to do. Babbel, the language learning app that sold more than 10 million subscriptions, offers 15-minute lessons, and that makes it the perfect way to learn a new language on the go. Whether you'll be traveling abroad, wanting to connect in a deeper way with family and loved ones, or you just have some free time, Babbel teaches language lessons that you will actually use in the real world. Lessons that were created by over 100 language experts using teaching methods that have been scientifically proven to be effective. With Babbel, you can choose from 14 different languages, including French, Italian, German, and Spanish. My Babbel lessons have helped me to be more comfortable and confident with my Spanish, and have helped me with the basics in a few other languages as well. Plus, Babbel's speech recognition technology helps you to improve your pronunciation, and in addition to lessons, you can access podcasts, games, videos, stories, and even live classes. And it comes with a 20-day money-back guarantee. Start your new language learning journey today with Babbel. Right now, get up to 55% off your subscription when you go to babbel.com/America. That's babbel.com/America for up to 55% off your subscription. Babbel, language for life.
I'm Khalil Gibran Muhammad.
I'm Ben Austin. We're two best friends.
One black.
One white.
I'm a historian.
And I'm a journalist.
And we are back for season 2 of Some of My Best Friends Are, where we have real talk about the absurdity and intricacies of race in America.
Join us as we talk to notable guests like former Attorney General Eric Holder, restorative justice leader Danielle Serid, and other notable people about how to make sense of this moment.
Listen to season 2 of Some of My Best Friends Are wherever you get your podcasts.
Conchita arrives in Nebraska and starts taking classes in home management, Braille, computer training, and cane travel.
I was like, I'm going to learn all these things, and then I'm going to pick and choose what I do. So at that point, I never used a cane. And so I was like, I'm going to go to this program, learn how to use it, and then not use it because I don't want people to see me. I was super self-conscious about like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when people see me with a cane? And this idea that like, no one's going to want to talk to me. I'm going to use a cane and no one's going to date me ever, right? And I'm just going to stand out. When I first showed up to my first cane travel class, Jeff Altman was my instructor, and he was telling me, you know, at the end of this course, when you finish here, we're going to drop you off somewhere, and you're going to find your way back, and you can't ask anybody. You have to figure it out with everything you learned. And I was like, there is no way I'm going to be able to do that. Like, that's just... I don't know how to cross a street on my own.
All of travel training is done with blindfolds because most people have some amount of vision. So Conchita is blindfolded, and then her instructor places a cane in her hand.
You kind of hold it in your palm and close over it, and then you tap back and forth. So when your left foot goes forward, the cane is tapping on the right. And when your right foot goes forward, the cane is tapping on your left. So it's kind of like a tap, tap, back and forth.
Learning it is one thing, but trusting the cane is another.
The way I always would go downstairs is I would hold on to the handrail. If there wasn't a handrail, then I wasn't really going down those stairs. So what I learned was that you could use your cane and put it on the step in front of you so that the cane sweeps the stair and you can feel it. So no matter what, your cane's going to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of you. And we were practicing going down steps. And that's something I really struggle with because I don't have depth perception. And so I just kind of stood there and just like cried and cried and cried. And my instructor was like, you know, understanding of my situation, but also was like, how old are you? Like, have you never gone down steps? I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like, it's actually really sad that like I'm in my 20s and I don't know how to go down steps by myself.
Days like these would leave her feeling defeated, but she'd call home for encouragement and the strength to keep going.
I don't think I went home the whole time I was there because I was I didn't have money, so I wasn't going to go home. But my family was really supportive. Like, when they started seeing my transformation, it did transform their ideas.
In addition to all of the hands-on courses, Conchita also had philosophy class.
It was really kind of Socratic seminar style where it's like very open-ended and like, what do you think about this? I was like, all right, cool. We're going to sit here and chat. Like, I can do that. And one of the things we would talk about was this idea of how we viewed ourselves and then how the public viewed us, because I think that's the hardest part. The hardest part is you can learn to use a cane, but if you can't accept the fact that people are going to treat you differently, then you're never going to use it. Like, you have to be okay with being different, and you have to be okay with recognizing that I'm not the problem. Like, the public doesn't understand, and that's their issue, and I'm not going to take that upon myself to have to fix their issues.
After a few months at the center, Conchita works up the courage, albeit reluctantly, to use her cane in public.
I love to dance, and I love to go out. I would go out with my friends a lot when I was in California. We would go dancing all the time, and of course, I didn't use a cane then. And so my friend was like, oh, let's go to the club, and it was like super close to where we were staying. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to take my cane because it isn't like I can see better at night, and, you know, like, no one's going to talk to us. And she was like, no, come on, like, we should really take it. It'll be fun. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the worst. So we show up, and in most clubs, they have like platforms you could stand on to dance. And I would have never done that before because I couldn't see, because if I could fall off that ledge. So because we had our canes, we were like, let's do it. And, we had a couple drinks in us. So we were like, yeah. And so we get on this ledge with our canes and we're like dancing. And then other people were like, oh my God, that's awesome. So like other people got up on there with us and like were dancing with us. It was just such a great experience. And it was just, I think, totally better than what I imagined. I imagined we were going to be like totally ostracized. People would be like, you're all so weird. And people, it wasn't like that at all. Like, we had such a good time. And we actually ended up meeting some guys that we, like any good club night, we invented this elaborate story that we were sisters and, all of the things you do when you go to the clubs. And we had just such a good time. And I was like, I would have really just missed this experience because I was so caught up on, this idea that people were going to treat me differently.
I want to take a moment to talk to you about HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you get farm-fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. March is National Nutrition Month, and HelloFresh makes it easy to choose delicious, dietitian-approved meals. Simply look for the Dietitian Win tag on their menu choices for meals under 700 calories and with 1/3 less sodium. And powering up with protein is easier than ever with HelloFresh. Just check for the Protein Smart tag on their menu to quickly find recipes featuring 30 grams or more of protein, like 1 pot pork and black bean chili or creamy Dijon dill chicken. HelloFresh knows that you're busy, and that's why they take care of the meal planning and prepping, freeing up extra time in your schedule. With pre-portioned ingredients, foolproof recipes, and convenient doorstep delivery, HelloFresh makes it easy to get dinner on the table. I made my first HelloFresh meal last week, Italian chicken over lemony spaghetti. The ingredients traveled from the farm right to my doorstep in less than 7 days, and when I pulled everything out of the box, it was fresh. I prepped everything, cooked it, and had dinner on the table 30 minutes later. And it was delicious. If you're interested in trying HelloFresh too, go to hellofresh.com/America60 and use the code America60 for 60% off, plus free shipping. That's hellofresh.com/America60 and use the code America60 for 60% off, plus free shipping.
Tracy Ellis Ross here. Want your curls, coils, and tight textures to be juicy and joyful? Well, Pattern Beauty has everything you need to unleash your best wash and goes, twist outs, fades, bantu knots, and more. Use the passcode podcast15 to save 15% on your next order at patternbeauty.com.
Nights like these and all of her classes and being in community with so many other people like her starts to chip away at her feelings of resentment towards her blindness.
So I think one of the reasons why I was able to understand this idea of identity as blindness is because I had that background as identity and being Mexican, right? So like I understand that I'm Mexican and that sometimes people are upset about it and that's their deal. Like there's nothing wrong with being Mexican. And so I was able to translate that over into blindness. I was able to be like, oh, it makes sense to me. Like it just makes sense that like I'm blind. I'm not the problem. If other people have an issue with it, that's on them.
At the end of 9 months, Conchita completes her training, having learned how to navigate a city, use a computer, read Braille, and cook and clean all on her own. Every participant of the training has to write a speech in Braille and then read it in front of everyone at graduation.
I went from knowing no Braille at all to being able to read a speech in front of people, which was super exciting. My family couldn't be there because they were in California, but I had the people from the center and I, read my speech about I came here to learn skills and to learn some of these things that I had decided I wasn't going to use, such as a cane. And I left being completely transformed. They have this kind of ceremony that is, there's a bell, and when you graduate, you ring it, and it's this idea that it's like the Liberty Bell.
After graduation, Conchita decides to go back to school, this time in Louisiana, where she earns a master's degree in education.
One of the things that I'm really passionate about myself is Spanish-speaking community. I come from a Spanish-speaking, growing up learning English in public schools and realizing that the services and everything just isn't the same. You don't get the same service. You don't get the same opportunities because your family doesn't understand English, doesn't understand what's going on, and the school system is kind of failing that too, not making the connections.
Conchita focuses her studies on helping English language learners and students with special needs more confidently navigate the education system. And then she and her friends start organizing trainings, similar to what she'd been through in Nebraska, for blind children in Mexico. The trainings were done entirely in Spanish, and when word gets out about what they're doing, they receive so many donations of canes and funds that they're able to start a nonprofit called Metas, which stands for Mentoring, Engaging, and Teaching All Students. When they arrive in Mexico, Conchita and her team use culturally relevant lessons that help their students feel more connected in their daily lives.
So there's a song in Spanish that everybody knows that you sing while you hit a piñata. And so we were like, okay, we're going to sing the song, and you have to tap your cane to the song. And then when it's your turn to hit the piñata, you have to find the piñata by yourself with your cane and then hit it. So to them, it was like the funnest thing in the world. And so
Can you sing the song?
So the song is Dale, 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 no pierdas el tiro, porque si lo pierdes, pierdes el camino. Ya le diste una, ya le diste dos, ya le diste tres, y tu tiempo se acabó. So the last part of it is like, you hit it once, you hit it twice, you hit it 3 times, your time is up. And the kids were just like, oh my God, we're hitting a piñata. And to us, we were like, we're tricking them into learning how to use their canes.
After a few of these trips, Conchita realizes that these services are needed in the U.S. just as much as they were in Mexico. And she recognizes that families needed to be involved so that they understood how best to support their loved one and wouldn't have to live in fear about how their family member would make it in the world. So Conchita and her organization begin the first of what will be a series of trainings, all in Spanish, for blind people and their families in Texas. Undocumented people don't have access to federally funded trainings, like the one in Nebraska. But Conchita's trainings don't ask questions about residency. She starts by having a meeting with the blind person and their family member. She explains what to expect and answers all of their questions and tells them how they can support their loved one through the experience, all in their language.
We recently applied for a grant to do this training again in Texas in the spring, and we won the grant. So we're going to fully be funded to do a training there with families and students, and it's going to be 100% free to them. So we're going to pay their hotel and their food and all of the things, and all of the sessions are going to be led by blind people, and we're really excited about it. I think being blind and using the word blind isn't just kind of a characteristic, but rather it's also an identity. And so, yes, it's recognizing that I don't see, but it's also recognizing that I'm part of a bigger community of people and culture and history that kind of all goes in together. I'm Conchita Hernández Legorreta. I am first generation Mexican immigrant. I am now the Maryland Blind and Low Vision Specialist, which means I just kind of oversee the education of blind students in Maryland. And I'm a doctoral student getting my degree in special education.
Conchita's story highlights the fact that we live in a society that labels immigrants as aliens and deems them as people undeserving of resources and respect, and mostly leaves the disabled to fend for themselves. We failed to give Conchita the aid that she needed in order to thrive, and we are failing more than just Conchita. And that made me ponder, what is it specifically that we are failing at? Difference is a part of humanity, and yet society doesn't seem to make space for it, which is honestly such a bummer because there is strength and beauty in the fact that we see differently, learn differently, and think differently. There is strength and beauty in our differences. And yet, we are taught to hide or be ashamed of people with disabilities. This failure in our society means that by not accounting for Conchita's differences as valuable, we as a whole miss out on what she has to contribute. We're being robbed of so many people's value, and so many people are being robbed of the fullness of the life they could be living. Emboldened by her intersectional community and informed by her own experience, Conchita's learning evolves into teaching. She builds tools and a template to bridge the gap for others like her with the goal of autonomy and liberation. Conchita eventually becomes a translator and advocate between worlds. She claims her identity and the value of her space in society and finds joy and purpose. I am Tracy Ellis Ross, and I hope you enjoyed meeting Conchita Hernández Legorreta as much as I did.
I Am America is a co-production of Dear Media and Joy Mail Entertainment. Executive producer, creator, and co-writer is Tracy Ellis Ross. Executive producer, showrunner, and writer is me, Nicole Hill. Executive producer and co-writer is Adriana Ambrose on behalf of Joy Mail Entertainment. Managing producer is Rosalie Atkinson on behalf of Dear Media. Sound design and engineering by Mitra Kaboli. Our theme song, Strum, is composed by Jesse Montgomery. Story editing by Martina Abrams-Ilunga. Reporting and fact-checking by Siona Petros. Production assistance by Daniel Gonzalez. Executive producers are Brian Dobbins on behalf of Artists First, Jeff Berman and Brett Boutier on behalf of Magnet Companies, and Jocelyn Falk, Paige Port, and Michael Bostic on behalf of Dear Media.